Me, Sam, just a regular software engineer. Work for a mid-sized tech company, the kind that makes business software nobody outside the industry has ever heard of. My team is solid. We're the back-end guys, the ones who make sure the whole thing doesn't fall over. It's a pretty typical tech team, mostly guys. There's Edward, our senior architect. He's been with the company since the beginning, knows where all the skeletons are buried in the legacy code because he buried most of them himself. Quiet guy, doesn't say much, but when he does, you listen. Then there's the rest of the crew, a handful of other male engineers. We all get along. We do our work, we do it well, and we go home. Simple. We also have a couple of women on the team. There's Emmy, a junior dev who is genuinely sharp, asks the right questions, learns fast, quiet, but you can tell her mind is always working. And then there's Fiona. She's more of a project coordinator than a coder. Her job is mostly to organize meetings, take notes, and make sure our Jira tickets are updated. She's enthusiastic, very enthusiastic about corporate culture. For years, things were smooth. Our old manager was a guy named Tom. He was a former engineer himself. Tom's philosophy was simple. Does it work? Is it on time? Good. Don't bother me. Our meetings were a model of efficiency. We'd walk in, Tom would say, "All right, Project X is hitting a snag with the database connection pool. Edward, you looked at it?" Edward would grunt and say the issue was a configuration file from 2008 that nobody had touched. I'd add that the new library we implemented is probably causing a conflict. Emmy might point out a specific function in that library that's known to have memory leaks. 10 minutes later, we'd have a plan. Meeting over, back to work. It was a meritocracy. The person with the relevant information spoke. Nobody cared about anything else. Then Tom retired. We had a little party for him, gave him a gift card, and wished him well. For a couple of weeks, we were without a manager. It was peaceful. We just kept working. Then the announcement came. We were getting a new head of department. Her name was Diana. The introductory email was a masterpiece of corporate buzzwords. It talked about disrupting the vertical, leveraging new paradigms, and fostering a culture of inclusive innovation. I read it and immediately felt a sense of dread. Our first team meeting with her was something else. Diana walked in with a big, bright smile. She was dressed like she'd just stepped out of a marketing brochure for a startup. She introduced herself and talked for a solid 20 minutes. I don't think I understood half of it. She spoke about her vision for the team. It had very little to do with writing code and a lot to do with changing the team dynamic. She said our department had a perception issue within the company, that we were seen as unapproachable and insular. She mentioned that the monoculture of the team needed to be addressed to unlock our full potential. During this whole speech, I glanced over at Edward. He was just sitting there, completely motionless, with a face like a stone statue. Not angry, not bored, just blank. Fiona, on the other hand, was nodding enthusiastically at every single sentence. She looked like she was about to start taking notes. Emmy was looking down at the table, just kind of tracing patterns on the wood with her finger. The first few weeks were weird. She didn't really change any of our technical work, but she implemented a bunch of new team-building exercises. We had to start every morning with a check-in, where we shared our emotional state. Most of us guys just said, feeling good, ready to work. Edward's turn came on the first day. He just said, "I am present." Diana's smile tightened a little, but she moved on. She also implemented feedback sessions, where we were encouraged to share our feelings about our colleagues. Nobody said a word. It was just 10 minutes of awkward silence until the time was up. She seemed to get more and more frustrated that her methods weren't working. She saw a team that functioned perfectly well, but it didn't function the way she thought it should. The real change came about a month into her tenure. She called a special mandatory meeting. The subject was communication protocols. We all filed into the conference room. Diana was standing at the front next to a whiteboard with a bunch of diagrams that looked like they were from a sociology textbook. She started by talking about how traditional workplace communication is a product of systemic issues. She said that in male-dominated spaces, female voices are often suppressed, not through overt actions, but through a culture of conversational dominance. Men, she explained, have a tendency to interrupt, to speak over others, and to take up more conversational real estate. She said she had been observing our team meetings and noticed a clear pattern. The men, particularly the senior men, spoke first and most often. She wasn't wrong, technically. Edward often spoke first because he had the most experience. I spoke a lot because I was the lead on our biggest project, but the reason was competence, not gender. Diana, however, saw it differently. She saw it as a symptom of a toxic environment that needed to be corrected. So she announced the new rule. Her exact words were, to rebalance the conversational scales and create a more equitable and inclusive environment. We will be implementing a new communication protocol for all team meetings, effective immediately. She then laid it out. From now on, women will always speak first. On any new topic, I will open the floor to the women of the team. Only after every woman has had a chance to offer her thoughts and has explicitly said she is finished speaking, will the men be invited to contribute. The room was silent. I looked at Edward. Still a stone statue. I looked at the other guys. They looked confused, like they were trying to figure out if this was a joke. I looked at Emmy. She looked horrified. She visibly sank a little in her chair. Fiona, however, was beaming. She gave Diana a little nod of approval, a look of, finally, someone gets it. Diana looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge her. This will ensure that all voices are heard, she said, and that we benefit from the diverse perspectives on this team. Nobody said a word. What could we say? She was the boss. Arguing would just paint a target on your back. You'd be labeled part of the problem. The meeting was dismissed. We all walked out of the conference room in silence. The guys sort of scattered back to their desks. I went to the kitchen to get some coffee and just process what had happened. A few minutes later, Edward walked in. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, stirring it slowly. I was expecting him to be angry, to say something about how ridiculous this was. He just took a sip of his coffee and looked at me. She made a rule, he said, his voice completely calm. We are professionals. We will follow the rule. I must have looked confused, he elaborated. We will follow it exactly. We will not interrupt. We will not offer opinions until we are invited to. We will sit, we will listen, and we will wait for our turn. We will be respectful and patient. Then a tiny, almost unnoticeable smile touched the corner of his mouth. Let's see how it works. And then he walked away. I understood immediately. This wasn't submission. It was a strategy. Malicious compliance. We weren't going to fight her. We were going to give her exactly what she wanted and let the results speak for themselves. The word spread quietly among the men on the team. No big meeting, just a few quiet chats. The message was the same. Follow the rule. To the letter. No arguments, no protests, just silent, professional compliance. Our first daily stand-up meeting under the new regime was the next morning. We all gathered around the task board. Diana kicked it off with her usual chipper tone. Good morning, team. Let's start with our project updates. Ladies, the floor is yours. And then, silence. Crushing, awkward silence. There were 4 women in the room. Diana, Fiona, Emmy, and one of the admin assistants who had joined us. The admin assistant just looked terrified, like she had been called on by the teacher and didn't know the answer. Fiona looked at Diana, then at Emmy, clearly expecting Emmy to start since she was the actual developer. Emmy was staring at her shoes. She's not a shy person in a technical context, but she's not someone who likes being the center of attention. This whole situation was clearly her worst nightmare. The silence stretched from a few seconds to what felt like an eternity. The guys all just stood there, hands in our pockets or folded across our chests, looking completely neutral and patient. We were waiting, respectfully. Finally, Diana broke the silence, her voice a little strained. Fiona, would you like to start? Fiona cleared her throat. Yes, thank you, Diana. Well, yesterday I synergized our action items and updated the forward-looking roadmap. I think we're well positioned to leverage our core competencies moving forward. It was a sentence composed entirely of buzzwords. It meant nothing. Diana nodded like this was a profound insight. Excellent. Thank you, Fiona. Emmy? All eyes turned to Emmy. She looked up, and you could see the panic in her eyes. I continued working on Ticket 742, she mumbled. I'm still investigating the bug. Great, Diana said, her voice overly bright. Any other thoughts, ladies? The admin assistant shook her head quickly. Fiona said she had nothing more to add. Emmy looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. All right then, Diana said, turning to the men with a triumphant smile, as if to say, see, it works. Gentlemen, the floor is now open. Edward spoke first, his voice even. I have no update. My work is dependent on the resolution of Ticket 742. I went next. Same for me. I'm blocked until Emmy's bug is fixed. One by one, the other guys said the same thing. The entire project was bottlenecked on this one issue, the issue Emmy was working on. In a normal meeting, Edward or I would have immediately started asking Emmy questions. What have you tried? Did you check the logs? Is it a null pointer exception? Let's take a look at it together after this. We would have solved the problem as a team, but the new rule prevented that. We weren't allowed to engage until the women had finished. Emmy had given her update and said she was done. So the topic was closed as far as we were concerned. The stand-up ended in under 2 minutes. It was technically a meeting, but nothing was accomplished. Diana looked a little confused, like she couldn't quite put her finger on what was wrong. She had followed her plan, but the result was empty. This pattern continued for the next week. Every meeting started with a long, awkward silence. Fiona would then deliver a string of meaningless corporate platitudes. Emmy, under immense pressure, would give the shortest possible update on her work, clearly terrified of saying something that would invite questions she couldn't answer on her own. Then it would be our turn. We'd state our status, which was almost always blocked or no update, because all our work was interconnected. We weren't being rude, we were being professional. We answered the questions we were asked. We gave our updates when it was our turn. We just didn't volunteer anything. We didn't collaborate. We didn't solve problems in the meetings anymore. How could we? The format made it impossible. The meetings, which used to be the engine of our team, became a dead ritual. The real work started to happen outside the meetings. We'd use Slack DMs. I'd message Edward, "Hey, got a minute to look at this?" He'd come over to my desk. We'd solve it quietly. The problem was, this was slow and inefficient. You couldn't get the whole team's input at once. Emmy was left completely isolated. The guys felt bad for her, but we couldn't break the rule. Breaking it would prove Diana's point that men just couldn't help but dominate the conversation. We had to stick to the plan. The project tracker started to reflect the new reality. Tickets that should have taken a day were taking 3. Tasks that needed a quick team discussion were sitting in the to-do column, gathering digital dust. The velocity chart for our team, which had been a point of pride, took a nosedive. Diana noticed. Of course she noticed, but she couldn't understand why it was happening. In her mind, she had created a more equitable environment. She couldn't grasp that the old environment, while not fitting her textbook definition of inclusive, was incredibly effective because it was based on merit and efficiency. She started trying to force the issue in meetings. "Emmy," she'd say, her voice dripping with encouragement, "tell us more about the challenges you're facing with Ticket 742. Don't be shy. We're all here to support you." This just made it worse. It put Emmy on the spot and made her feel even more pressured. Emmy would just stammer, "I'm still working on it. I just need more time to think." In the old days, Edward would have gently interjected, "Let's whiteboard it. Sometimes drawing it out helps." And we would have solved it in 5 minutes. Now, he just sat there, patiently waiting. Diana's frustration started to show. Her bright smile became more and more forced. She started scheduling more meetings, as if the problem was that we weren't meeting enough. We had meetings to prepare for other meetings. We had meetings to debrief the meetings we just had. Each one was the same. A long silence, followed by Fiona's word salad, followed by Emmy's mumbled one-sentence update, followed by the men giving their status as blocked. It was a slow-motion train wreck, and we all had front-row seats. Fiona, for her part, was thriving. She was Diana's star pupil. She would talk and talk, filling the silence with her corporate jargon. She clearly saw this as her moment to shine, to prove her value to the new boss. The fact that she never said anything of substance seemed to be completely lost on both of them. She started referring to herself and Diana as the female leadership of the team. The atmosphere in the office got tense. The natural, easygoing camaraderie we used to have was gone. The team was now split into factions. The men were united in their silent compliance. Diana and Fiona were in their own little alliance, and Emmy was stuck in a no-man's land in between, stressed out and isolated. I remember one afternoon, I saw Emmy at her desk, just staring at her screen. She looked like she was about to cry. I felt a pang of sympathy. I almost went over to offer help, but I couldn't. It would undermine everything. The whole point of Edward's plan was to let the system fail on its own terms. Any attempt by us to rescue the situation would be twisted into an example of men needing to swoop in and save the day. A couple of weeks into this new world order, things started to break. Not just our team's productivity, but actual things. An urgent bug report came in from our biggest client. Their entire system was down. It was an all-hands-on-deck emergency. In the old days, Tom would have gotten us all in the war room, and we'd have it fixed in an hour. Diana scheduled a meeting. We all filed in, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Diana started, "Okay, team, we have a critical situation. Ladies, what are your thoughts on the initial steps?" Complete silence. Even Fiona seemed to realize that this was not the time for her usual buzzwords. The client was losing thousands of dollars every minute. Emmy looked like a deer in headlights. This was a massive system-wide failure. It was way above her pay grade to diagnose. The silence stretched on. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Diana looked around, her eyes wide with a dawning sense of panic. She looked at Fiona, who just shook her head. She looked at Emmy, who looked down at the table. Finally, she looked at the men. At Edward. Her new rule, her grand vision of female-led communication, was crashing head-on into the brutal reality of a business emergency. You could see the internal conflict on her face, sticking to her principles versus not getting fired. After what felt like a lifetime, she finally cracked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Edward, what do we do?" Edward didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just calmly said, "Sam, pull up the server logs from the last hour. I'll check the error monitoring. Rest of you, start checking the recent code commits. Let's go." And just like that, the spell was broken. We were a team again. We swarmed the problem, calling out information, sharing theories. We found the issue in 20 minutes. A bad data migration script had corrupted a key database table. We had a fix deployed within the hour. As we were finishing up, Diana was just standing in the corner of the room, watching. She looked smaller, somehow. Deflated. For a moment, I thought maybe she had learned her lesson. Maybe she would realize that her rule, however well-intentioned in her mind, was a complete disaster in practice. I was wrong. The next morning, we got an email from her. The subject was, "Debrief on yesterday's incident and recommitment to our communication protocols." The email praised the team for solving the problem, but then it went on to say that the initial confusion was a sign that we needed to double down on the new rules. She claimed that the initial silence from the women was a sign of how much psychological safety was still needed, and that the men eventually taking over was a regression to the old, non-inclusive ways. She ended the email by stating that the women speak first rule was more important than ever and would be strictly enforced without exception. That's when I knew. This wasn't about efficiency or teamwork for her. This was about ideology. She was willing to let the entire department burn to the ground, as long as it burned according to her principles. The mood among the guys turned from wry amusement to cold anger. We had followed her absurd rule. We had watched the project stall. We gave her the rope, and she was refusing to use it. Edward's response was simple. We continue to follow the rule, exactly as written. So we did. We went back to the silent meetings. We went back to being blocked. The productivity of the team flatlined completely. We were now weeks behind on our major project, Project Omega. Emails started flying from other departments. Project managers and directors were asking what was going on. Why had the most reliable team in the company suddenly stopped delivering? Diana handled these inquiries by sending replies filled with corporate jargon about restructuring and refining our processes. She was trying to create a smokescreen, but the smoke was starting to get thick, and people outside our team were starting to notice the fire. Then, the email landed in our inboxes, the one we all knew was coming eventually. It was from the office of Mr. Henderson, the vice president of the entire technology division. The subject, mandatory review of Project Omega. The email stated that due to significant delays, Mr. Henderson would be attending our next team meeting to get a direct status update and to understand the roadblocks our team was facing. The meeting was scheduled for the end of the week. Diana forwarded the email to the team with a single line added, "Team, Let's be prepared to showcase our progress and our new, efficient workflow. I read that line, and I almost laughed out loud. Showcase our progress? Our new, efficient workflow? She was either completely delusional, or she was planning to throw us all under the bus. A quiet sense of anticipation settled over the team. This was it. The grand finale. The train had been careening down the tracks for months. Now, we could finally see the end of the line. The days leading up to the meeting with Mr. Henderson were some of the most surreal I've ever experienced at a job. Diana went into overdrive. It was like she thought she could fix months of stagnation with a few days of frantic, misdirected energy. She started holding prep sessions, exclusively with Fiona and Emmy. We could see them in one of the glass-walled conference rooms. Diana would be at the whiteboard, drawing charts and diagrams, speaking with animated gestures. Fiona would be nodding along, looking deeply engaged. Emmy just looked like a prisoner being interrogated. She sat slumped in her chair, looking exhausted. Diana was clearly trying to coach them, to arm them with enough technical knowledge and corporate speak to survive the meeting with Henderson. She was trying to build a dam with scotch tape, minutes before a tidal wave hit. The men on the team, meanwhile, just kept our heads down and did what little work we could. The atmosphere among us was calm, but it was the calm of a submarine crew waiting for the depth charges. We all knew what was coming. Edward was the picture of tranquility. He just sipped his coffee, reviewed his code, and waited. His confidence was infectious. He had seen this kind of corporate nonsense before, and he knew it had a limited shelf life when it came up against reality. The day of the meeting arrived. You could feel the electricity in the air. Diana was wearing her most severe, "I'm a serious manager" power suit. She walked around the office with a forced, brittle smile. Fiona was practically vibrating with nervous energy. She had a new leather-bound notebook and a pen that probably cost more than my lunch. Emmy looked pale. She barely said a word to anyone all morning. We all filed into the main conference room a few minutes before the scheduled time. It was the big one, the one with the long oak table that was usually reserved for executives. Diana took her place at the head of the table. She arranged her laptop and a stack of printouts in front of her. She was trying to project an image of control. The rest of us took our seats. The men sat on one side of the table, quiet and composed. Emmy and Fiona sat on the other, next to Diana. Then Mr. Henderson walked in. Henderson was in his late 50s. He was an engineer by trade who had worked his way up the company over 30 years. He wasn't a flashy guy. He didn't care about buzzwords or management fads. He cared about one thing: results. He had a reputation for being tough but fair. He could smell BS from a mile away, and he had zero patience for it. He walked in, didn't smile, just gave a curt nod. "Diana." He took the seat opposite her, at the other head of the table. He opened his own laptop, and the project's performance dashboard immediately appeared on the big screen at the front of the room. The screen was a sea of red charts showing our velocity dropping off a cliff, red indicators showing missed deadlines, red alerts for the ballooning bug queue. It looked like the command console for a nuclear meltdown. Henderson didn't say a word. He just let us all look at it for a good 30 seconds. The silence was deafening. Diana, bless her heart, decided to be the one to break it. She launched into her pre-prepared speech. "Thank you for joining us, Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice a little too high. "As you can see from these metrics, the team has been in a period of significant transition. We have been actively deconstructing old workflow patterns and implementing a more agile, human-centric communication strategy designed to empower all voices and drive synergistic outcomes." Henderson didn't even look at her. His eyes were glued to the screen. He let her talk for another minute. She used the words paradigm, proactive, and holistic multiple times. Finally, Henderson held up a hand. Just one hand, a simple gesture. Diana's voice immediately trailed off. "I've read your reports, Diana," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "They're very creative. Now, I want to talk about reality." He pointed a finger at the screen. "Project Omega is the single most important development initiative in this company for this fiscal year. It is currently 6 weeks behind schedule. This is not a transition. This is a failure." He looked away from the screen and scanned the faces at the table. "I'm not here for a presentation. I'm here for answers, specific technical answers." His eyes landed on me. "Sam," he said, "you're the lead developer on the core module, correct?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Good," he said. "Then you can tell me why the primary data bus is showing a 300% latency increase in the last month. We're getting timeout errors all the way up the stack. What did you change?" This was it. The moment of truth. It was a direct question, from the VP of the division, addressed to me. My job was to answer it, but I had my orders. Not from Henderson, but from our department head, Diana. I looked at Mr. Henderson. I looked at Diana. Her eyes were wide, pleading with me. She was probably hoping I'd just forget the rule and save her, but Edward's words echoed in my head. "We follow the rule. Exactly." I took a breath and spoke in a clear, respectful voice. "Mr. Henderson, I can answer that question. However, per our team's established communication protocol, I must wait until my female colleagues have had the opportunity to speak first." The entire room froze. I could feel the collective intake of breath. The other guys on the team didn't move a muscle. They just stared straight ahead. Mr. Henderson's face went through a remarkable series of transformations. First, confusion, then disbelief, then a slow, dawning anger that seemed to start in his jaw and spread across his entire face. He slowly turned his head to look at Diana. He didn't say a word. He just stared. Diana started to stammer. "Well, you see, Mr. Henderson, what Sam is referring to is a new initiative to foster inclusivity." Henderson cut her off, his voice dangerously quiet. "Are you telling me that your engineers are not allowed to answer a direct technical question from me because of a meeting rule?" Diana was sweating now. "It's just to ensure everyone's voice is heard." Henderson's gaze was like a laser beam. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with icy sarcasm. "Let's follow the rule. It's your rule, after all." He turned his gaze to the other side of the table. "Ladies," he said, the words sounding like an insult, "the floor is yours. The primary data bus, latency, go." A new, even more profound silence descended on the room. Diana looked desperately at Fiona. This was her star pupil's moment to shine. Fiona cleared her throat. She opened her fancy notebook. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," she began, trying to sound confident. "I believe the latency issue highlights a critical need to reevaluate our strategic vendor partnerships and to circle back on our core value proposition. It's an opportunity to—" "Stop," Henderson said. It wasn't a shout, but it hit the room like a gunshot. Fiona froze, her mouth half open. "I did not ask for a press release," Henderson said, his eyes boring into her. "I asked for a technical reason. Do you know what a data bus is?" Fiona's face turned beet red. She just shook her head, unable to speak. Henderson dismissed her with a wave of his hand and turned his attention to the last woman at the table. "Emmy," he said. His tone was a little softer with her. He knew who the actual engineers were. "Do you have an answer for me?" Poor Emmy looked like she was about to have a panic attack. All the pressure of the last few months, all the stress and isolation, it was all culminating in this one moment, in front of the VP. She spoke in a voice that was barely audible. I think it might be related to the new authentication library," she whispered. "There's a known issue with how it handles session tokens under heavy load. It creates a bottleneck." She was right. That was part of the problem, but it was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. She had been working on her little corner of the project, but because of the communication breakdown, she had no idea how it connected to everything else. Henderson nodded slowly. "Okay, that's a start. A bottleneck in the auth library. Why wasn't this caught in testing? Why wasn't it flagged and fixed weeks ago?" Emmy looked like she was about to cry. We couldn't. It was hard to get everyone's input to confirm it." That was all Henderson needed to hear. He had the what and the why. He knew the technical issue, and he knew the process issue that had let it fester. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Diana. His face was no longer angry. It was something worse. It was disappointed and weary. The face of a man who was tired of dealing with nonsense. "So this is your new, efficient workflow," he said. "You've silenced the most experienced people on your team. You've isolated your junior engineer and put an impossible amount of pressure on her. You've ground the most important project in the company to a halt. All in the name of, what? Inclusivity?" Diana tried to speak. My intention was... I don't care about your intentions, Henderson said, his voice rising for the first time. I care about my company. I care about the people who rely on our software. I care about the hundreds of employees whose jobs depend on this company being successful. We are an engineering firm. We build things. We solve problems. We don't have time for your social experiments. He then turned his gaze to the wisest man in the room. Edward, he said, you've been here since the beginning. Tell me plainly, what is this rule? Edward sat up straight. He looked directly at Mr. Henderson and spoke in a calm, factual tone, as if he were describing a bug in the code. Mr. Henderson, some weeks ago, Diana implemented a new mandatory policy. The policy states that in all team meetings, men are forbidden from speaking until every woman on the team has had the opportunity to speak and has stated she has nothing further to contribute. As a professional team, we have been adhering to this policy without deviation. Every word was a nail in Diana's coffin. He didn't editorialize. He didn't complain. He just stated the facts, the absurd, insane facts. Henderson stared at Diana for a long time. She seemed to shrink under his gaze. Finally, he shook his head, a look of profound disgust on his face. Diana, he said, his voice flat and final, meet me in my office in 10 minutes. The rest of you, stay here. Diana stood up on shaky legs. She didn't look at anyone. She gathered her things and practically fled the room. As the door closed behind her, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. Henderson turned back to the team. His entire demeanor changed. He was a commander taking control of the battlefield again. All right, he said, his voice all business. Rules over. Effective immediately. Sam, your turn. Give me the full breakdown of the latency issue. Don't leave anything out. And just like that, the floodgates opened. I spent the next 10 minutes explaining the entire technical problem. The auth library bottleneck that Emmy found was the start, but it was causing a cascade failure in the caching layer, which Edward had suspected but couldn't confirm. As I talked, Edward would interject with details about the server architecture. The other guys would chip in with their own observations from the modules they were working on. Within 15 minutes, we had the entire problem mapped out on the whiteboard. Within 20, we had a 3-point plan to fix it. It was beautiful. It was the way we used to work. Efficient, collaborative, and based entirely on who had the right information at the right time. Henderson watched the whole thing with a small, satisfied smile. See, he said when we were done, that's a team. That's how it's supposed to work. Now go fix it. We all left the conference room feeling like a massive weight had been lifted off our shoulders. We never saw Diana again. The next day, an email went out from HR announcing that she had been reassigned to a new strategic role in another division. Everyone knew what that meant. She'd been put in a broom closet somewhere to wait out her contract. Mr. Henderson named Edward as the interim department head. Our first team meeting with Edward in charge was the following morning. We all gathered in the usual room. Edward walked in, coffee in hand. He stood at the front of the room. Project Omega, he said. Status, go. And we did. The meeting was over in 5 minutes. It was perfect. Later that day, as I was getting ready to leave, Emmy came over to my desk. She stood there for a moment, looking nervous. Hey, she said quietly. Hey, Emmy, you doing okay? I asked. She nodded. Yeah, I just wanted to, say thank you. I wasn't sure what to say. For what? We just went back to doing our jobs. I know, she said, and she gave a small smile. That's what I'm thanking you for. She went back to her desk, and I packed up my bag. Walking out of the office that evening, I couldn't help but reflect on the whole bizarre chapter. We hadn't fought. We hadn't argued or protested. We had simply complied. We had let the system Diana built run its course and collapse under the weight of its own absurdity. Turns out, reality has a way of asserting itself. You can try to bend it to your ideology, but in the end, the code either compiles or it doesn't. The project is either on time or it's not. And just like that, the great workplace revolution was over. We just went back to work.